The views and opinions expressed in The Fact Is with Hollis Grant are those of Hollis Grant and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Droids Canada Network. Droids Canada Network does not take responsibility for any content or position produced by Hollis Grant and his show. Listener discretion is advised.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about alcohol and crack cocaine, some heroin, the good things in life, apparently. As the Canadian government decides and issues out a new decree stating that having more than 2 drinks a week, that's right, if you drink 3 drinks a week, 3 alcoholic drinks a week, you're at risk for serious alcohol-related diseases. As the government decides to start limiting and telling you how much that you should be able to drink, they are legalizing crack cocaine and heroin. So on one hand, it's okay to inject yourself or smoke as much crack as you want, but if you're having 4 beers a week, you better settle down and go detox yourself out. Now, you won't find this particular coverage in Canada on any of the mainstream media, the legacy media, or the government-funded state media. So this particular article is taken from the Daily Mail, which is a British newspaper. And the headlines are always so fascinating with British media. They really do know how to write a good headline. What have Vancouver virtue signaling liberals been smoking? On Tuesday, the Canadian city will decriminalize heroin and crack, even though it already has 2,000 homeless addicts and streets too dangerous to walk down. So just already from the title, you know that it's going to be slightly biased. It's going to be leaning to the right because you have the term, virtue signaling liberals. But nonetheless, let's continue on with the article and see what it has to say here. Canadians pride themselves on the beauty of their country and generosity of the people. And as you pass by the rows of sparkling glass towers framed by the snow-capped Rockies and Pacific waters, Vancouver is undeniably breathtaking, widely regarded as one of the world's most desirable cities to live in. But drive down East Hastings Street and all such optimism is dispelled. For block after block in this downtown neighborhood has been surrendered to hundreds of desperate drug addicts. Their tents line the doorways of every building that hasn't bribed them to move on or pleaded for the police to intervene. The goods they have stolen to feed their drug cravings litter the pavement, waiting for someone who might buy them. The addicts hunch in doorways, openly injecting, cooking, and smoking hard drugs such as heroin, crack cocaine, crystal meth, and fentanyl, the lethal synthetic opioid that is 50 times stronger than heroin and has killed hundreds of thousands across North America, which is manufactured in China. Others lie senseless on the pavement, even in the rain, or staggering around looking for their next fix. We're driving, not walking, down East Hastings. My guide, Dr. Julian Summers, one of Canada's leading experts on drug addiction, assures me that you don't want to walk here if you can help it, even in the daytime. Assaults by crazed addicts on random passerbyers have become so common that even ambulance crews now demanding special protection. And say Dr. Summers and other experts, the crisis is about to get even worse thanks to the ruinously misguided woke politics of Canada's ruling class. For the province of British Columbia, which includes Vancouver, is about to start a 3-year experiment to decriminalize all hard drugs. We've covered this before on droidscanada.com. You can go back and take a look at those past episodes or have them listen to those. In its sheer radicalism, it's a move without precedent anywhere in the world. Add a note to that Portugal does or has decriminalized hard drugs. That's obviously a discussion for another day. They do have their challenges with their drugs. And yet, in an almost laughable coincidence, the policy comes into force on Tuesday, just days after Canada's ultra-progressive federal government recommended citizens have no more than 2 drinks a week under some of the strictest alcohol consumption guidelines in the West. Obviously, you're not including the East because that would lead you down the Muslim countries where it is illegal to consume alcohol. Canada, which last year also announced plans to put alerts such as poison in every puff on cigarette packets, as well as warning labels on fatty or salty foods, is more than happy to stigmatize drinkers, smokers, and obese people in the interest of improving their health. But bizarrely, hardcore drug use, with all its attendant crime and squalor, seems to be an entirely different matter. British Columbia, and especially Vancouver, has become a mecca for Liberal Canadians who have elected a provincial government that believes society is too judgmental about addicts. Decriminalization will eliminate the shame of drug use, they insist. Predictably, the policy is backed enthusiastically by the National Liberal Party, headed up by the endlessly worthy Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Health officials say it's all about breaking down barriers of stigma of drug addiction and reducing the rising number of fatal overdoses and ensuring that drug users can access pure supplies safely manufactured by pharmaceutical companies. Keep in mind, these same health officials are the ones that came up with the COVID suggestions. We've covered this on past episodes as well. They've suggested, especially in British Columbia, to have sex through glory holes. That was covered on the show. Dr. Theresa Tam has also suggested to wear a sheet while having sex and keep on wearing a face mask while having intercourse. So these are the same people that think that, drug users, hardcore drug users, should end the stigma. Some 14,000 people have died from fatal overdoses in British Columbia. Currently, an average of 5 a day, since the province, which has a population of 5.3 million, declared a public health emergency in 2016. Another option is to go after the people that are importing it, start going after China. You know that's where the drugs are coming from. Start cracking down on the supplies coming into the country. Start dealing with drug dealers. Cut off the supply. But that's not an option. Let them keep on bringing in drugs and making sure the drug users have everything that they need. In 2021, fentanyl, which dealers mix into other drugs because it is cheap and incredibly strong, was involved in 87% of these deaths. In Vancouver alone, at least 2,200 addicts live in tents. But the decriminalization scheme appears not only to hardened addicts, but anyone 18 and over who wants to take hard drugs, including inevitably those who were previously deterred by their illegality. Anyone will be able to inject, smoke, snort, or swallow whatever, wherever they like, even sitting on the swings next to children in the playground if they want, and as long as they have no more than 2.5 grams of a drug in their possession, the police will have no power to stop them. This may sound like an utterly mad decision, but given that Vancouver has been crowned Canada's smug capital, it is not entirely a surprising one. This is, as I discovered, a city where motorists drive down streets full of raving addicts without batting an eye, but will honk in outrage if a pedestrian dares to sneak across a red light. Decriminalizing drugs, as London Mayor Sadiq Khan reportedly wants to try with cannabis, is different to legalization, as it will still be a criminal offense to sell them, but critics fear that the distinction is unlikely to uphold when the floodgates open. Jerry Martin, a former cocaine user whose brother recently died of an overdose on East Hastings, has already announced plans to open a shop selling heroin, crack, and powder cocaine in MDMA, also known as ecstasy, in Vancouver's downtown east side. He says he's already secured supplies that have been tested for contaminants as well as bulletproof vests for staff to cope with the violent robbers he expects will be inevitable. Martin, who insists his main aim isn't to make money, but to ensure addicts can access untainted drugs, told the Mail that he certainly won't be alone. "Oh, there's a ton out there who will copy me. I hear it everywhere," he said. While it will remain illegal to sell hard drugs in this way, as it would entail stocking more than 2.5 grams the law will allow, he remains adamant he will follow through on his plans, saying that if he is arrested when his shop opens, he will launch legal action. And there's part of the problem as well. You have a guy that's openly flaunting that he will break the law, he will sell hard drugs, he does not care, he will provide bulletproof vests for his staff that are stupid enough to work there because he knows that people will rob them. And he's doing it not because of the money, but because he just really wants people to have really good drugs and not die. Then what's mentally wrong with this guy to get to a point where he thinks it's okay to sell this addictive substance to somebody so they keep coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back to get their fix, and there's no end in sight? It's people like this guy that are helping steer policies, and these politicians will listen to a nut job like this and say, well, that's a good idea, then maybe we better make sure that, in these safe ejection sites that we can hand out the stuff safely to these people. It's absolutely asinine. Meanwhile, Vancouver charities and clinics, some of which already offer prescription heroin and fentanyl to addicts, of course they do, because pharmaceutical companies are making money off these so-called addicts, so you want to keep them safe, because if you don't keep your clients safe, you can't make any more money. They're being urged to increase the free drugs they distribute at supervised injection sites where facilities include trained nurses and crack pipe vending machines. Of course, just keep them smoking and injecting all this horrible substance that is worse than anything nature could make for you, because you need to make that money. But, well, it's okay. We'll pass it off as if we actually care about those people. Although exactly what they'll be allowed to prescribe remains unclear, doctors and pharmacists in British Columbia will begin dispensing hard drugs to addicts on a larger scale from Tuesday. I urge any listener, if you have the thought that a safe injection site is a very good place to go, I urge you to visit the ones downtown Toronto, or if you're in the Niagara region, the ones in St. Catharines, and you take a look and see what that area is really like. And keep in mind that these doctors and activists live nowhere near these injection sites. Many GPs, citing their Hippocratic oath to do no harm, are understandably reluctant. Skeptics also note that the real winners in all of this will be the big pharmaceutical companies, which stand to make billions from producing their own medical-grade narcotics to be doled out to addicts. A major report by Stanford Lancet Commission formed a response to the opioid crisis in the U.S. and Canada, has warned against the influence of the pharmaceutical industry, highlighting its cozy links with politicians and officials determining drug policies. And that sounds awfully familiar with the COVID vaccine. If people thought there was a conspiracy there, and after all that's known now, and if you still think that that's a conspiracy, then looking at this particular policy of creating medical grade, pharmaceutical grade drugs to help addicts, not to get them off the drugs, but to help keep them high forever. And if you didn't think COVID was a conspiracy, you're definitely not going to see it in this one. So, in that case, if you don't think COVID was a conspiracy in terms of not the actual virus, but the rollout of the vaccine and how quick things were about the vaccine and the vaccine policies that came along with it, and the money that was thrown at governments from pharmaceutical companies, and the money that the pharmaceutical companies made, why wouldn't they do it for drug addicts? The fashionable notion that big pharma drugs will displace illicit and more lethal supplies is also being challenged. As I reported for the Mail last year, the legislation of cannabis in California has led to an increase in illegal sales due to the higher price of legal alternatives. There's another problem, too, which the government is ignoring for the sake of political posturing, opponents say. Drug users have been pouring into Vancouver from across Canada, with the decriminalization likely to attract even more. And can you blame them? After all, which addict isn't going to take advantage of free drugs administered by a friendly medical staff who makes sure they don't overdose and with no risk of arrest? In fact, when you cut through all the moralizing about destigmatization, critics of the decriminalization plan isn't remotely progressive. It will actually reinforce an existing two-tier system in which those addicts who are wealthy are urged to access expensive rehab treatment, celebrities, as they always have been, while the poor and destitute will find it even easier to keep taking drugs and not clean themselves up. The government's detractors say it is simply doubling down on a harm reduction and safe supply policy that has been failing for years to counter the soaring numbers of fatalities. The jaw-dropping squalor in places such as East Hastings streets, where addicts sleep in their own feces night after night, has been obvious for years. The government is guilty of extraordinary neglect, says addiction expert Dr. Summers of Vancouver's Simon Fraser University. Giuseppe Nacchi, a former addict who now helps run a drug rehabilitation center outside Vancouver, feels the same. The world's gone bonkers, he said, of the decriminalization policy. It's 100% misplaced progressiveness. Assuming that by removing the criminal stigma of drug addicts will get treatment is so naive. It is, quote, like the worst Disney movie ever with no happy ending, end quote, he added. And that's from a drug addict, a former drug addict. On the contrary, his own experience and that of many others has taught him that addicts need to experience some sort of stigma and discover that their dependency has consequences before they can sober up, he said. Hitting rock bottom. You have to hit absolute rock bottom. The reason why a drug addict will keep on doing and keep on going is because they're enabled. You have someone that enables them. Someone's giving them, feeding them money. If you take everything away from that drug addict, they have nothing, and they're waking up in absolute destitute poverty, and they realize that they have absolutely nothing. They're going to come back from that and say, this is no way for any person to live. But why would you do that when you can get free drugs now and you don't have to go out and do what drug addicts have to do to make $5? Perhaps the most shocking prediction is that the move will create an army of new hard drug users who'd previously been deterred by illegality. The number of diversity of drug buyers, university students like my sons who might say, I've always been interested in trying heroin, will go up, said Dr. Summers. Increasingly, Jerry Martin, an ex-coke user, setting up his hard drug store, agreed. That's the idiot. Jerry Martin, the moron. 95% of people are good people. They want to try something, but they don't want to break the law, he said. I think a lot of kids will now be going out and taking MDMA, thinking it's pure, but everything's laced with fentanyl. So good old Jerry's idea is I better set up a shop to make sure that these kids that I don't think should be doing it should be getting good stuff. Canada's Conservative Party leader, Pierre Poilievre, also predicts a major increase in overdoses and massive increase in crime, accusing his opponents of flooding the streets with poison. So, as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his righteous acolytes push ahead with their ill-advised policy, they look set on only to fan the flames of the war against drugs rather than douse them. Interesting article. I always, again, love how British media uses vocabulary and really paints such a good image. Clearly, you can see it's a little one-sided, but in this issue, I don't think there is an argument to be made to say, well, we need to look after these poor drug addicts. You can look after the drug addicts to get them off of the drug. The solution should be not getting you safe drugs. The solution needs to be, how do I take you, drug addict, and not make you a drug addict anymore? Not to give you free drugs and let you, do that and say, here you go, read this before you smoke your crack or shoot up, and then let them continue to do that. There needs to be a point where you say, no, you can't do this. We have to stop you from doing this. We need to get you off of these drugs and to get you to be a productive member of society, not allowing the cycle of you using again and again. But we'd love to hear what you have to say. As always, reach out to us on Twitter, on our Facebook page, and of course on droidscanada.com. I'd like to thank you again for listening to The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. I hope you have yourself a wonderful week.
Hi, this is Hollis Grant, host of The Fact Is. You can find us Wednesdays on droidscanada.com, where we discuss current affairs from around the world.